Does the Pac-12 actually have the money to rebuild and poach schools from the Mountain West? I think they do.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. We've always got you covered. We'll talk Kalen DeBoer a little bit later because I think he's already proving some people wrong, and a couple of dark horse playoff contenders that you should be aware of for a college football season that is just so much closer than you probably think. But we'll start today with the Pac-12 rebuild. So I'd gotten a couple questions about this and where the Pac-12 was actually at with regards to their finances, and do they actually have the money to add Mountain West schools? And according to a past report from the Nevada Sportsnet, the answer to that question is absolutely yes, they do. Now, this is contingent upon how many schools they decide to add. I think the sweet spot, because the minimum number is they have to bring in 6 schools by not 2025, but by the 2026 season if they're going to remain a conference. And if Oregon State and Washington State want to keep that war chest they got from the 10 departing schools, the label, the name, the brand of the Pac-12 has to stay alive. Otherwise, that money will go back and get evenly dispersed amongst the 12 former Pac schools. So that number, roughly, there have been various reports, but John Wilner over at San Jose Mercury News, it's roughly in the $222 million range by best estimates there. Now, according to this Nevada Sportsnet report, which was from a while back, it lays out really, really clearly, and you can go check it out if you'd like. It lays out very clearly what it costs to bring in select Mountain West schools rather than the entire league. Because if they go reverse merger, that would actually be the most financially lucrative option for Oregon State and Washington State. Is if they just say, okay, let's dissolve the Mountain West, you all come over and join us here, we play under the Pac-12 label, they could then have a massive financial gap between them, at least in the short term, and most of the schools they're going up against. Certainly you'd have some schools like Boise State, most notably, that might have a financial backing that's similar, but still, I don't even know if they'd be able to match what would be, an extra $110 million roughly each over the course of a couple of years, and they could spend it however they would like. But I think they're saving that money to, try and perhaps settle a couple of different debts. There's a Holiday Bowl lawsuit. There's, all sorts of stuff flying around for the Pac-12 to try and settle and deal with here. But their number one objective is to bring schools into the league. It is to figure out what they are going to look like as a conference come 2026, which is also the year going into that season that the Mountain West media rights contract will have expired. And so if you have a better league, then you've got a better chance of going to Fox and CBS, who are the current Mountain West TV partners, and saying, you should come be a television partner with our conference rather than their conference over there. So this NSN report said that to add 6 teams, it would cost about $67.5 million because there's a clause with this Mountain West Pac-12 scheduling arrangement, or Pac-2 if you prefer, that says if you bring over the entire league, there's no penalty. But if you try to poach teams and bring over just some of them and leave others behind, well, that's going to cost you a pretty penny, which makes sense. If you're Glory Navarez, you want to have that as an available option to be able to have that reverse merger on the table while also accounting for the possibility that I think Oregon State and Washington State should and probably will pursue, which is bringing in the best Mountain West teams that they can find, and then also going out and picking the best out of the American Conference or the Sun Belt Conference, right? I mean, I haven't talked about the Sun Belt as much, but certainly you go find whoever's available, whoever is willing to make that premier group of 5 conference in the country to provide the best access to the playoffs. So adding 8 teams from the Mountain West would cost about $94 million. So neither of those numbers is taking out the entirety of the Pac-12 war chest of, about $220 million. It certainly cuts into it, but this is what the money's for. I don't know what else you're saving it for. A rainy day fund? The rainy day is here. The rainy day has arrived. It is here. It is time to figure out what you're going to do. And I'm not saying Oregon State and Washington State need to announce their moves at this very moment, but certainly these conversations need to be had right now. Realignment moves have not ever, nor will they ever, take place in a 2-week period or 1 month period. There are ongoing conversations and thoughts, and I know that Oregon State and Washington State have had them. Their presidents and athletic directors have done interviews several times, and they've made it very clear. They intend to rebuild the league. That's the direction that they are planning to move towards. And if adding 6 Mountain West schools only costs $67.5 million, again, according to the Nevada Sportsnet report, that's just not that much. It might be more expensive than that. I've seen numbers flying around online about, $140 million. I don't think that's only adding 6 schools. And adding teams from the American Conference is a heck of a lot cheaper than the Mountain West. And so if you can come at any number, right? Let's say the Pac-12 has to, settle some debts within from the conference's past and just kind of get that out of the way. Let's say it amounts, just as a rough example, to $50 million, and you're sitting at $170 million. If it only costs you $67.5 to add 6 Mountain West schools, you might add 8, but maybe you feel like you can add 4 or more elsewhere. And that can be a temporary solution. See where that conference goes. And maybe you expand that league again one day. And it becomes kind of the group of 5 version of what's currently taking place with the Big 12 and the ACC, where Oregon State and Washington State get left behind and they're trying to buy their way in. And if Mountain West schools got left behind, they would be trying to find their way back into that league. And you would have teams from other conferences, just like you have now, who are trying to find their way into that league as well. So I also want to shout out Reese Davis, because I thought he had a pretty awesome take. He was on a podcast and he was saying that Oregon State and Washington State, for their meeting this year on November 23rd, I mean, first of all, he pointed out in a tweet that they're not going anywhere, a statement that I agree with, by the way, wholeheartedly. And he said they should have a trophy for the game. And my first reaction was, that's cheap. You don't need to have that. It doesn't need to be a trophy sort of deal. But then I thought about it. I'm not saying it needs to be a Pac-12 championship trophy. There are games played across the college football landscape that are unique and historical in nature, in which a trophy or an item is exchanged and is held in possession by the winning team for an entire year. There are many such instances out there. Doesn't this feel like a matchup of that magnitude? Doesn't it seem like the sort of game that has special recognition, that has special meaning only to those teams involved? Stanford and Cal have played the big game for a long time. And they exchange, pretty sure it's an axe at the end of every game. It's unique to them. It's special to them. It matters to them. And certainly, this was the case last year, and it will be the case every year they play going forward. When Oregon State and Washington State play, it will bring up the demons of the past while also showcasing an opportunity to project to the future and what it can be. So, shout out to Reese Davis for keeping the Pac-2 in the college football landscape and making sure that they don't just go off to the side. And he's recognizing what I and many others have recognized for a long time. They're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. They're going to make a plan. Would they like to get into the Big 12 or the ACC? I'm sure they would. You can't bank on that, though. That can't be your fallback option. The fallback option is rebuild the league. And if those numbers hold true, and it costs under $100 million to add 6 Mountain West schools, I think that'll be a no-brainer move for the administrations at Oregon State and Washington State. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @McLaughlinCFB for those listening on podcast. I'm going to talk about Kalen DeBoer next, because I think he's proving people wrong. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, which is the better of the two things to burn. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. For those watching on YouTube, yes, that is an X-Wing behind me. No, the sequels are not good, but yes, that picture is very, very cool. So, Kalen DeBoer is proving people wrong at Alabama. Those two things didn't relate to one another. I just felt like mentioning both, and this is my show, so that's how we roll. Kalen DeBoer is off to a good start on the recruiting trail. If you look at the 2024 recruiting class, it ended up being all right. Now, of course, there were a couple of transfers out of it. Peyton Woodyard went to Oregon. Julian Sain went to Ohio State, but they brought in a bunch of transfers as well, and their win total is 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. Oh, what do you know? Alabama is currently, I know there's a long way to go. Just save yourself the comment. They're third in the country in recruiting. Oh my gosh, I'm shocked. But Kalen DeBoer didn't recruit that well at Washington. He's not a big recruiter. I don't know if he can recruit down south. We haven't seen it yet. Well, we're kind of sort of starting to see it. They picked up a quarterback commit recently of, wait for it, the blue chip variety. They're currently ranked ahead of Georgia by a little bit. That may or may not last. But here's what you have to consider. Even if you think that 3 is as high as Alabama's recruiting ranking is going to get in the 2025 cycle, if it's currently a 3rd, what's the lowest you think it can get to? What is the absolute lowest that Alabama's recruiting class, 17 commits into their 2025 cycle, and certainly not done, what's the lowest they're going to drop to? This was the big question surrounding Kalen DeBoer. You cannot look at what he did at Washington or any of his other coaching stops as a head coach or an offensive coordinator, frankly, and say this guy does anything but win football games. When he first took the job at Alabama, I remember the title of my show, the first day. It was the first episode of Locked On College Football, in fact. And the title was Kalen DeBoer Can Win National Championships at Alabama. You know why? Because he can. Because he's that caliber of coach. And up at Washington, make no mistake about it, those rosters had been incredibly well recruited and grossly mismanaged before he got there. He introduced Michael Penix to the equation, and everybody else was mostly already on his team. And so that was, I think, a legitimate question. For those who'd say, oh, everybody was wrong to doubt Kalen DeBoer. It was completely ridiculous. They were just being haters and whatnot. No, I think it's a fair question to ask. There's a difference between asking a question, between questioning and doubting. It's a more efficient way of what I was going to say. Questioning is, I think this is possible. I'm just not 100% confident it's going to happen, so I need to wait and see. Doubting is, nah, this can't happen. No, he can't do this. No, he can't do that. Well, Kalen DeBoer is showing you right now, for anyone who questioned whether he can recruit, that he can. And yes, the transfer portal counts. He brought a bunch of guys with him from Washington. So why don't we even say, let's hold judgment again? Let's say we don't know what he can do in the transfer portal as the head coach at Alabama because he's not always going to have a previous team to just pull guys from. That's not how that's going to work. So, okay, I'll reserve judgment there. But of the two, which one do you think would be harder? Recruiting high school kids or recruiting transfer portal kids? I'm going to go with high school kids there on the whole. So the recruiting class is overall looking good, and I'd fully expect them to bring in a top 10 class. And by the way, those rosters that he had at Washington, they were full of good players. Jimmy Lake and Chris Peterson had put together several really, really good-looking recruiting classes. They were not top 5. They were not top 10 classes. They were good. Got a lot of good players, a lot of NFL players as a result, who weren't all looking like they were going to be NFL players until Kalen DeBoer got there. And that's the other question that I have. Again, not a doubt with Alabama that I have. A question, maybe the biggest question I have about Alabama. What is Jalen Milroe's role in a Kalen DeBoer offense. Stylistically, these two guys are not the same. They're just not. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're different. Think about Lincoln Riley and Jim Harbaugh. Those are both great college football coaches. I will once again remind you that Lincoln Riley is not the village idiot, even though the perception of him is that he's terrible. He's so bad. No, he's not. I got several years of data to prove that he is not. Anyway, those two coaches, one of whom has a national championship, which took like 10 years, by the way, and one of whom does not, play football, or they want their teams to play football in a completely different fashion. Lincoln Riley wants to spread you out, run a lot of 11 or 10 personnel, and he wants to throw it around the field and have a complementary but successful running game. Jim Harbaugh wants to line up, draft offensive linemen as weapons, as he said once he got to the Chargers and they took Joe Alt out of Notre Dame, probably the best offensive tackle in the draft. And he was asked at a presser, or he said at a presser, I'll probably face questions about weapons, but we view offensive linemen as weapons. You think Lincoln Riley views offensive linemen as weapons? I don't. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because he's been an incredibly successful college football coach. He's never had a losing season. He's never even had a 500 season. He is a very successful coach. Both have been really successful. They view football differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so stylistically, that's how I think of Kalen DeBoer and Jalen Milroe. When you think of Jalen Milroe making plays last year, go watch last year's game against Michigan in the semifinal. Milroe, I thought, was mostly pretty good. He makes some ridiculous plays with his legs. When you think about Michael Penix the last couple of years and what he did in Kalen DeBoer's offense, do you think about what he did with his legs? No. Who was the quarterback that Kalen DeBoer had? This is a great trivia question that you can stump your friends with. Who was the quarterback, now a backup in the NFL, that Kalen DeBoer coached before Michael Penix at Washington? 3, 2, 1. Jake Haener is the name. Jake Haener's a baller, gamer, absolute dude. Glad to see he's carved out a backup role in the NFL. Guy was a baller at Fresno State. Where did his best plays come from? Oh, that's right, from the pocket. From the pocket. So I wonder what those styles look like. I think it's entirely possible you could have any one of three scenarios stylistically for Alabama's offense, and Nick Sheridan is their offensive coordinator. Number one, DeBoer adapts his system to Milroe's strength and plays through him, as the Alabama offense did last year. Once they figured out he was a starter, of course. Number two, there is a hybrid system in which you have more quarterback runs than DeBoer typically has in his offensive scheme, but you also have more pocket plays required of Jalen Milroe than he had a season ago, and he's not running as much. And number three, Kalen DeBoer thinks he can take Jalen Milroe, who's certainly a talented guy and has good arm talent and good athleticism to keep plays alive, and he hones him into the kind of quarterback he wants him to be, which is your legs are an asset to allow you to throw, not just an asset for you to run. And he adapts the game of Jalen Milroe into what his offense will look like. I think the most likely option is number two. But am I curious to see how that fits? Yeah, because they're different. It is not what DeBoer has had. And I think they're going to have the opportunity to succeed. He's got a good receiving core. You got Ryan Williams, the 5-star plus true freshman. You got Jeremy Bernard coming over from Washington as a transfer. Those are just two of the weapons they have. There are several others, but those guys on their own, I think, give you enough. So I'm more than a little fascinated to see how that all plays out. But right now, I think Kalen DeBoer is doing just fine, and we might be overthinking him, as I mentioned before. 10-2 in the playoff feels very likely. The win total is 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. If you feel differently, by all means, you may put your money where your words or mouth is, depending if you're talking or typing. Speaking of the playoffs, two, not one, but two teams that I consider a dark horse in that they're not at the top of your mind when you think college football playoff, but you have to consider them for different reasons. Missouri to make the playoff might be one of the best value bets in all of college football. I say that because their schedule might be the most workable in the SEC. So Eli Drinkwitz and company went 11-2 last year. I pause after things I want to make sure you heard correctly, because you did hear that correctly. Missouri football, 11-2, beat Kansas State in a thriller, beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. It's a pretty darn good year. Eli Drinkwitz got an extension for a good reason. They bring back their head coach. They've got their quarterback. They got their star receiver. Boy, those are a lot of things I like. You know what I love even more? Their schedule. Missouri might have the most workable schedule in the SEC. The other team I'm going to talk about is Kansas. I'll talk about their playoff aspirations in just a moment. So here's Missouri's schedule in order. I'm just going to read you all 12 games, and then I'll dive into a couple of points. Hosting Missouri State, hosting Buffalo, hosting Boston College, hosting Vanderbilt, at Texas A&M, at UMass, poor UMass, host Auburn, at Alabama, host Oklahoma, at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, host Arkansas. Let me ask you something. If you were to draw up the most workable, which is kind of the polite way of saying easiest, schedule in the SEC, how would it look any different than what Missouri has got here? You play Alabama, that have a first-year head coach who I'm very high on. It's going to be a good team. You play them on the road. That's never an easy place to go. I believe Bryant-Denny Stadium has historically been a challenging place to emerge victorious. I don't expect that to change this year. But you're not playing third-year LSU head coach Brian Kelly. You're not playing Kirby Smart in Georgia. You're not playing Steve Sarkisian in Texas. No, you got a first-year head coach down there. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying of the bunch, would you rather play a third, fourth, or fifth-year head coach or a ninth-year head coach, whatever year Kirby Smart is in, or would you rather play the first-year guy? Probably the first-year guy. Doesn't mean I think you're going to win the game. I'm just saying it's more preferable than the other options available. So you play Alabama. You host Oklahoma, who, by the way, are working in a brand-new offensive line and a true freshman quarterback, essentially. At Texas A&M, that's not an easy game. That's certainly not an easy game. Where else are the difficult games in here? I mean, Auburn at home? Sure, I like what Hugh Freeze has done this offseason. They could lose that game, but it's a home. It's a home. There are a lot of wins on that schedule. And the reason you need to think about Missouri in terms of the playoff is that they don't have to make the SEC championship game. There are 5 automatic bids given to the 5 highest-ranked conference champions. There are actually 7 automatic bids. And the 6th and 7th automatic bids, I believe, in all likelihood, barring unforeseen circumstances in which a 9-3 team gets in and then loses to go 9-4. LSU did do that a couple of years ago. If that doesn't happen in the Big Ten or the SEC, you're going to have, in all probability, the Big Ten and SEC championship game losers also get into the playoff. Because in the Big Ten, you don't have divisions anymore. So what if it's been, as it has been several years in the past, the teams with the 2 best records, if you'd eliminated divisions, you'd have 11-1 Ohio State, 11-1 Michigan. And if Michigan were to have won those games, 12-1 Michigan, 11-2 Ohio State. Oh, yeah, no, they would have both made the playoff unquestionably. Okay. What about in the SEC? Last year, Georgia, Alabama. Yeah, both teams would have been in the playoff. That's been the most common occurrence in the SEC championship game. It's not every year. I think it is more likely than not that at least one Big Ten SEC title game runner-up gets in, and I think it's more likely that both do than none of them do because of the way the conferences shake out. Just saying. So if Missouri goes 10-2, which is wildly workable on this schedule. I mean, that's got to be the most workable schedule in the SEC. First of all, you start off with 4 straight games of home cooking. They're going to be a fat favorite in all of them. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt. That's 4-0. Texas A&M, year 1 with Mike Elko at the helm. Look, it's not easy to win at College Station, but I mean, I've seen it happen before. Missouri's a good football team. They could win that game. If they win 2 of Texas A&M, Alabama, which are on the road, and Oklahoma, you can bookmark Missouri for 10 wins in a playoff appearance. 10-2 SEC, it's going to get you in. even if they don't have a bunch of quality wins. Let's say they lose to Texas A&M and Alabama, but they beat Oklahoma and everybody else on their schedule. I don't know how Missouri's going to get left out of the playoff. SEC bias is a thing, deservedly so. But that's one of the fascinating things to watch for in the college football season in this 12-team era. What does the committee do with 10-2 SEC Big Ten teams and like 10-2 Big 12 teams? How do they feel? How do they adjudicate? Do they look at strength of schedule? Because it's not a very tough schedule. Missouri's win total is 9.5 for a reason. I don't know if they're actually a 9.5 caliber preseason win total team, but that's a 9.5 schedule with the team that they are. So Kansas, on the other hand, is the opposite. Kansas is the opposite because in order for the Jayhawks to get into the college football playoff, again, entirely feasible, they have to win their conference championship. So they're a plus 600 to make the playoff, but that wouldn't be the smart bet because Kansas is not getting an at-large berth here. Their schedule includes a non-conference bout at Illinois, who might not even make a bowl game this year. They've got Big 12 games at West Virginia, at Kansas State, Iowa State. I mean, that's just not going to be enough. Barring a 12-0 season in which they lose the Big 12 championship game, go 12-1, I do not foresee them getting in the playoff. I fully believe this is possible. Kansas could go 11-1, lose the conference championship game to Utah, for instance, and miss the playoff. That could happen. The caliber of that schedule. I just read you a weak Big 12 schedule. This is what it is in full for Kansas. Lindenwood at Illinois. Lindenwood's a new D1 program. UNLV at home, at West Virginia, TCU, at Arizona State, Houston, at Kansas State, Iowa State, at BYU, Colorado, and at Baylor. That's not going to be treated the same. That 11-1 versus a Missouri 10-2. Who do you think the committee's going with there? I've got my gut instinct, and so plus 600 and make the playoff is an underdog play with nice value, but the smarter play would be for Kansas plus 850 to win the Big 12 championship game. They've got the third best odds according to our friends over at FanDuel, behind Kansas State and Utah, who are far more sizable favorites in terms of their odds to win the conference championship this year. But I wouldn't rule out Kansas. I mean, Jalen Daniels is still there. Lance Leipold is still there. They lost their offensive coordinator, but it's not like Jalen Daniels doesn't know that system inside and out. He's been doing it for the last several years. So I would look for Kansas because of the conference title implications, and I would look at Missouri because of their lack of need to make the conference title as teams that could find themselves in the college football playoff this year that you might not think about right at first. If there's anyone else you want me to talk about, let me know. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.